Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to continue with the Cold War. Yesterday I showed you a video on the Berlin Wall, how it developed and eventually came down. Today we're going to talk about part 3, big science in the nuclear age. How we started out with the atomic bomb and we went to the nuclear bomb, but we're talking about other scientific things, space race and the age of computers. So. Now, the arms race is when both sides, both the United States, the West, and the Soviet Union, the East, struggle to gain a weapon superiority. We wanted to have more nuclear missiles and bombs than the Soviets did, and they, in turn, wanted to have more than us. So the arms race dealt with having more nuclear weapons. Now, in 1952, the U.S. and then later that year, the Soviet Union exploded a hydrogen bomb. This is our first time we had the atomic bomb. We know Nagasaki, Hiroshima in 1945, but now in 1952 we have the H-bomb, and the H-bomb is 400 times more powerful than the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki. Just to give you a concept, 450 times more powerful. Now, in March of 1954, the United States test, and again, we use the word test, but basically they were exploding a bomb, testing to make sure it works. A hydrogen bomb in the Bikini Islands. These are in the South Pacific, a group of islands. We brought a number of older World War II battleships, aircraft carriers. We had ships that we had taken from the Japanese and the Germans from their navies at the end of the war. We anchored them all around. They placed a H-bomb underwater, then they exploded it to see how it works. So when you show the video and you see this photograph, you see all these little black things going up. Those are actual World War II warships, like battleships. All right, so let me show you this video here. It starts out with these bombers flying out, but it wasn't dropped by a bomb, so I guess the video does that. So anyway, here we go. You can see how it explodes up through the water. You can actually see some of the ships being carried up. All right, let's stop there. It just keeps repeating it over and over again, this YouTube video. But and here we see the famous mushroom cloud that is created when the atomic bomb and later the hydrogen bomb explodes. And you can see the warships. That one black thing you see right here, I'll just show you here. This is here, is actually, I believe I read somewhere, it was actually an aircraft carrier or a battleship. It was an American ship that was actually lifted out of the water. So if you've ever seen the Intrepid over in New York City, picture the amount of force it would have to take that and actually lift it up out of the water like this. And you get an idea how powerful this bomb is. All right, let's move on. It's interesting enough, later on, this man created this new type of female bathing suit, and he took the name from the Bikini Islands where they had the testing. Thus, we have the bikini. Now, the U.S. is going to conduct 19 test explosions between 1954 and 1958. The Soviets will also be testing about as many bombs in the Soviet Union. They don't do as many in the water. They do them mostly underground. Now, up to the late 1950s, the U.S. relies on long-range jet bombers. This is the B-52. The B-52 Stratofortress was produced, and some are actually being used today. Now, to give you an idea how big it is, here we see an actual B-52 Stratofortress, and I want to compare it here to a Hudson Catholic anatomy and physiology teacher that we all know very well. And you can see the size comparison between the bomber and the biology teacher. She jumped in later on and took off. Oh, of course, we know she didn't, but but that gives you an idea. Now, the Soviets had the Tupolev Tu-95. It was codenamed the Bear. This was theirs. It was actually propeller driven. It's the only long-range bomber in the Cold War that was propeller driven. They still use them today. Missirova's husband, back when he was in the Soviet Air Force, was actually a pilot on one of these bombers. So he would actually flew one of these planes. Now, in the late 1950s, the Soviet Union and the US developed long-range rockets with nuclear weapons called ICBMs, which stands for Intercontinental Ballistic Missiles. They would come up out of the ground. Both the Soviet and the United States would keep them in these silos. These were below ground to protect them. They were heavily insulated. I have a little photograph here. This will show you. Oh, okay. Before we get to that, both sides used rocket technology taken from the Nazis after World War II. The U.S. actually had grabbed one of the top Nazi rocket scientists, a man named Wernher von Braun. He had developed the V2 rocket program for Nazi Germany. And now that we captured, we brought him back to the United States. We set him up in laboratories here, and he started developing rockets for the U.S. And there he is, one of his rockets. Now, the U.S., as I said, will develop the Minuteman missile system in 1962. It had a range of 8,100 miles. Now, these silos, I have a little map here. There we go. These silos were all below ground. These silos are in Arizona, not far from Tucson. Over here, let me just show you. Over here, we have, of course, there is the missile. Below ground, there's a large covering that goes over it, so it's protected. Over here, we have the missile launch room, which is, you can see about, number of floors underground. This building over here is where the men would stay, when they were not on duty. So their idea is some of them they'd have shifts over here. And this is where they would then fire the missiles if given that, alert to fire the missiles. Luckily, it never happened. All right, let me get these out of here. We'll move on to the next picture. All right, these are the missiles. They were actually below ground. When we were there that day, they're actually covered over with plastic. That's why you see the reflection, because they didn't want the rain or sand to get down in there. Well below ground, they have the launch areas where the men would stay. Actually had these very thick blast doors. They're like bank vault doors. So you go through here, they would shut the doors to protect you in case there was a nuclear blast at the missile site. It would protect them. And then inside, you'd have the people in here. They would have they'd wait for an alert to come in, and then they would fire the missile. Oh, there's that anatomy and physiology teacher again. And she has her finger on the button. Are you nervous? They should be nervous. I don't know. No, I'm not nervous. Are you going to push the button, sweetheart?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, why not? Wow. All right, moving on. She's not going to really push the button. In 1962, we have the development of the Polaris missile that could be fired from submarines. The Soviets also produced their own missile that they could fire from submarines. Nuclear missiles, that is. So, the United States and the Soviet Union will develop what they call the nuclear triad. Triad, of course, means three. I'm going to get the right way. I can't do. There you go. 3 components. All right, 3 components. It's a nuclear arsenal with 3 components. We have long-range bombers. Where is it? There it is. ICBM missiles and nuclear submarines. So this is the Triad, all right? 1, 2, 3. All of them could fire nuclear weapons or drop bombs on the enemy. Now, the Western view of the development of these systems was the strategic theory of, ready for it, mutual assured destruction. Any attack on us, we have enough weapons to fire back and destroy the enemy. So if we're ever attacked, we can then retaliate by destroying the entire planet. Both the United States and the Soviet Union had enough, I think I remember reading this somewhere, at one time they had enough weapons, nuclear weapons, to destroy the Earth 40 times. 40 planets. Think about that. How insanely crazy is that? Now, the use of nuclear weapons would cause the complete annihilation of both the defender and the attacker. That's the idea of the mutual assured destruction, which led to the policy of deterrence. Both sides had so many weapons, it would deter anyone from using them. Why would the Soviets fire or attack us with nuclear weapons when they know we could retaliate and destroy their entire country, even as our country's destroyed? And since we've destroyed both our countries, the nuclear fallout would wipe out the entire planet. So this was the idea of deterrence. As we look at it today, it does sound a little bit crazy, all right? And the reason it sounds crazy today is it was crazy. It was insane, the idea that we're going to stockpile enough weapons that if we're ever attacked, we could destroy them, they destroy us, and then, of course, the nuclear fallout spreads around the world, killing everyone in what we call nuclear winter. So it does sound insane, and that's only because it was. Now, let's talk about the space race. Now, the Soviets, as I'm going to put this here for you, the Soviets launched Sputnik. That sound is actually the sound that Sputnik made. Now, the United States, of course, was embarrassed by being beaten into space by the first satellite that orbited the Earth. And the United States will commit to a space program because now we're in a space race with the Soviets. Okay, and Sputnik is gone. It only went around the planet a couple times, but everyone was looking up in the sky, looking to see, because the Russians now had a satellite looking down on us, and this freaked everyone in America out. Now, in 1958, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, also known as NASA, is created. Remember that Nazi rocket scientist, Werner von Braun? Well, he joined NASA to work on the Saturn V rockets that will eventually put a man on the moon in 1969. Von Braun also developed the idea of space camp that would train children in fields of science and space technology. They still do this today. In fact, a couple students from Hudson Catholic have gone down to Huntsville, Alabama, to be where NASA has this space camp. Now, in 1961, after the Soviets had beaten us into space with the first satellite, they beat us into space again by putting the first man into space. Cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin. Interesting enough, we call our men to go into space astronauts from the word astro, and they call their people going into space cosmonauts from the word cosmo. So we use astro, they use cosmo. Anyway, Yuri Gagarin was the first Soviet launched into space on board the Soviet's Vostok 1, you see here on the right. He would make one orbit around the Earth. There we see a photograph of him, and he returned safely. So the Soviets beat us into space with the first man. But one of the reasons, and I'm not making excuses here, but one of the reasons is that the Soviets weren't as concerned with safety as much as the Americans were. If you ever see the movie Hidden Figures, which is an excellent movie about our space system, we wanted to make sure we had everything perfect. The Soviets were reasonably sure they were perfect, but if it didn't fail, they would just do it again. So that's why it took us longer for us. But we did get John Glenn into outer space a few years after this. Okay, this is the last thing we're gonna cover is the computer industry, how the computers affect the Cold War. Now, during World War II, there was a lot of wartime research which led to advances in computers. One of the U.S. Navy actually developed an electromechanical analog computer. It was small enough to fit onto a submarine. And what it would do is it would use trigonometry to, when the submarine captain you see here by the periscope fired a torpedo at a moving target, it would calculate the trajectory so that this torpedo would hit the target. Not easy to do when the target is a number of distance away, could be over a mile, and moving at a certain speed. So this is where computers are finally starting to be used. Also during World War II, the bomb you see here on the left was actually designed by Alan Turing. It was an electromagnetical device used by British cryptologists to help decipher the German Enigma machine. This is a code. If you ever see the movie The Imitation Game, this is what it's all about, trying to break the code. Turing was a genius. If you see the movie, unfortunately in 1954 he committed suicide, supposedly according to the rumors that he may have eaten a cyanide-laced apple. Now in 1944, British engineer Tommy Flowers designed the Colossus. This was the first electronic, digital, programmable computer. It used a number of these large vacuum tubes. There's the computer itself, and these are the vacuum tubes. I remember these when I was a kid. When I went to go to grandma's house, she had one of those like large TVs that was actually part of your furniture. It was in a cabinet. And if you looked in the back, you saw all these vacuum tubes and they kind of like lit up. And they were, and if they burned out, you actually had to call, these people don't exist anymore, but you actually had to call a TV repairman. They came to your house with a big box and toolbox, and they would pull the TV out. Did you ever have one of these, sweetheart?
Yes, we had a TV repairman.
TV repairman, and they would replace these tubes inside the back of the TV. Well, they also used them in computers, but they had a tendency to get very hot and to burn out. Now in 1945, ENIAC, electronic, numerical, integer, and computer, was amongst the earliest electronic general purpose computers made. Here we see a picture of it. It wasn't really as programmable as like your laptop is today. You see, to do different things, they would actually have to take wires out and connect them to different parts of the computers you see here. And it was really, really big. Where is it? There it is. In 1949, the UNIVAC, this is the Universal Automatic Computer 1, the UNIVAC 1, was the first commercial computer produced in the world, in the United States, but it was also in the world. Now there's the UNIVAC 1. You can see it looks like a desk, a regular desk with drawers in it. What's what they put in the drawers, probably some tools and stuff. You can see there's a keyboard and there's the computer above it. Now you simply just didn't type in information. You actually had to put in what they call punch cards. And the punch card would have the data in it, whatever you wanted to do. One of the jobs I had when I was in college, I worked in the admissions office up at Northeastern University. And I worked, what they would do is they would have folders. This is before we have laptops and computers like we have today. They had folders, and on the folders they would have a label, and the label would have the student's name, address, and social security number. But to get these labels, they'd be printed on a computer, And what I would do, my job was I would set at this other machine and I would just type in the names, addresses, social security numbers, and these punch cards you see here would come out. And the punch card had all the information programmed in all those, like, you see all the little holes there. Then they would go into another machine, the computer would read the holes, and they printed up the labels, and then we put the labels on these folders. Seems like a lot of work, but again, this is before, I mean, I was going before we had laptops, you know, back in, you know, olden days. Or what do we call it, sweetheart? Back in the day.
Back in the day.
Back in the day. Now, the computer here has 5,000 of those vacuum tubes, and it weighs an incredible 7.3 tons. So obviously, they're going to really reinforce these floors. And just to turn it on, it took a half hour to warm up. So next time you turn your laptop on and it's taking extra long to come on, mine does that all the time, think about waiting a half hour. Okay. Now, the transistor. The transistor replaced those vacuum tubes. They save space. You can see here they're a lot smaller. We still use them today, and they're a lot faster. And they totally revolutionized computers. They were invented at the Bell Telephone Labs in New Jersey back in 1949. Now, giant machines that filled rooms could now fit onto a desk. And this will be the thing that's going to make things like personal computers possible. The transistor is the key active component in practically all modern electronics today. And it's actually considered to be one of the greatest inventions of the 20th century. Before the transistor, there's a lot of things we could not have because they just were too complicated to do. But once we created the transistor, we were able to miniaturize so much. And like I said, the personal computer was one of the major things that came out of this. Now, during the 1950s, businesses started to embrace the computer industry. In 1959, Grace Hooper, who was a member of the United States Navy, wrote the first software to run computers. She invented what was called Flowmatic. It was the first English words data processing language. Here she is sitting at one of the ENIACs, teaching people how to do it. In 1959, her design led to COBOL. I remember studying this when I was in college. Did you have COBOL? No. Okay, that was actually, it's a computer language. It's an acronym for Common Business Oriented Language, and still used today. In fact, when this whole pandemic came out, they were actually asking people who knew how to use COBOL if they could come and work in hospitals and so on, because they actually needed this to for these giant databases. So Grace Hooper, being one of the first ones to do it, we have a lot to thank her for. She once had to remove a moth that somehow got caught in her computer relay switch that shut down a large computer. She had to go in there and she found this moth in there. So she came up with the term, ready, debugging. Oh, come on, you know that's funny.
Of course it's a woman.
You heard that, right? Okay. All the women right now are saying, yes, that's right. I can see it. Emily, Leslie, Elizabeth, Rachel, they're all agreeing with you, sweetheart. Yes. Well, that's it. Well, that ends our whole thing on the big science in the Cold War. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something about it, debugging for one thing, and enjoy the rest of your day. All right? See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.